One of the many things we've learned from superheroes and storytelling is that origin stories vary wildly. Not every character is born with superpowers. Some inherit them in other ways, have them granted, or even steal them. The latter is more often the case for the opposite end of the heroic spectrum. We are talking supervillains here. So today we are counting down the top 10 supervillains who got their powers from mutants. Of course, these villains are all Marvel characters since we're taking the term mutants to mean the race from Marvel's panels. So with that in mind, let's get to our list. Starting us off in at number 10, Onslaught. Onslaught was spawned from the darkest aspects of Magneto's mind combined with Charles Xavier's subconscious. How the hell did that happen? Well, this sentient psionic entity came to be after a battle between the X-Men and the Acolytes, in which Xavier used his telepathic powers to shut down Magneto's mind, forcing him into a coma. Now, this was in retaliation to a very violent yet iconic moment, when Magneto ripped the adamantium from Wolverine's skeleton. Xavier lost it, and all the anger, grief, and lust and vengeance inside of Magneto entered into Xavier's consciousness in the process, which then mingled with Xavier's own long-suppressed negative feelings. So while this supervillain didn't get his powers in a more traditional sense like others on this list did, his abilities, rooted in his psychic omnipotence, come directly from two of Marvel's most powerful mutants. In at number 9, X-23. X-23 is Laura Kinney, the clone and adoptive daughter of Wolverine. She was created by the Weapon X program to be the perfect killing machine, using Wolverine's DNA and therefore inheriting his powers. These include the adamantium-plated retractable claws in both her hands and feet, superhuman strength, durability, reflexes, agility, and animal-like senses, a regenerative healing factor, and extended longevity. Now, Laura would escape the facility when she was young and after a series of tragedies found her way to the X-Men, eventually attending the school at the X-Mansion and becoming a member of the X-Force. She would even adopt Logan's codename. Oh. Moving on to number 8, Rogue. Once upon a time, Rogue was a villain before she became a member of the X-Men. And we all know what Rogue is capable of. She can absorb the abilities of others, their memories, their personality, and even physical characteristics via touch. So yeah, she often gets her powers from other mutants. I mean, not her core power, but, you know, the powers she uses in battle and what have you. Now, initially she was a runaway from Mississippi and was adopted by Mystique, thus joining up with the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. She grew up as a villain, and after permanently absorbing Carol Danvers' psyche and Kree powers, she ended up turning to the X-Men as a means of maintaining her sanity, seeking out Charles Xavier's aid. It's worth noting that much of her backstory wasn't revealed until much later than her initial appearance, which went down in Avengers Annual Issue 10 in 1981. Up next, number 7, Sauron. Not to be confused with the Lord of the Rings villain, Sauron of the Marvel Universe is Dr. Kyle Lycos, a physician who was bitten by a mutant pterodactyl. This transformed him into an energy vampire, able to absorb the life force of others through touch. While technically he is a human mutate, he does get his powers from mutants. If he absorbs the life force of a mutant, he transforms into a humanoid petrodon, so basically a terrifying-looking pterodactyl creature. Unfortunately for Lycos, if this happens, his alter ego, which is called Sauron, takes over. In addition to the transformation, he gains the ability to fly, breathe fire, and of course has superhuman strength, speed, stamina, durability, and intelligence. And fun fact, the character was initially envisioned to be a bat-like creature, but after the Comics Code Authority was consulted, the bat-like creature fell under the prohibition of vampires by the code at the time. So the character was changed into a pterodactyl instead, which was the most bat-like creature that wasn't a bat completely that creators Roy Thomas and Neil Adams could think of. In at 6, Holocaust. Holocaust, originally known as Nemesis, hails from Earth 295, the Age of Apocalypse timeline. And similar to some of our other numbers on this list, he owes his powers to Apocalypse, his alleged father. Now, he serves as one of the 4 Horsemen and can absorb energies, which also charge him. During a battle in Japan, he slaughters thousands of humans in his father's name and absorbs a nuclear-level plasma blast from Sunfire, saving both himself and Apocalypse in the process. He also gains Sunfire's energy, which he would then use to try to kill Quicksilver. Magneto strips Nemesis of his flesh, though, leaving him to die, but Apocalypse recovers him and has Dark Beast create a suit of near-indestructible crystalline eco-armor in order to keep him alive, and keeping him in his current energy form in order to survive. Now, it's worth noting that his 616 version is known as Genocide, but he's also the son of Apocalypse, so there you go. In at 5, Madeline Prior. Madeline Prior is a clone of Jean Grey's, created by Mister Sinister, as a means of creating a genetically superior child between Jean and Scott. And this came to be when Jean, who was possessed by the Phoenix Force at the time, was too reckless for Sinister to make use of. So he cloned her. Because of this, she has Jean's telekinetic and telepathic abilities, although they manifested much later. While it's unclear as to whether she possesses the Omega level potential of Jean, Sinister was once able to use a Jean clone to contain the Phoenix Force, suggesting that Madeline is practically an equal to her original counterpart. Moving on to number 4, Exodus. Exodus is Benet du Paris, a character who first debuted in 1993 in X Factor issue 92. Born in 12th century France, Paris would cross paths with the eternal Circe when on a quest to find the Tower of Power. He would collapse in the desert while on this journey, only to be asked by a mysterious voice if he was willing to risk everything to become one of the strong. Obviously, he said yes. He was tested and his mutant powers manifested. Later, Apocalypse would strip him of his powers, sealing him away in a crypt in the Swiss Alps. Now flash forward to the 20th century. Magneto found Exodus, brought him to Avalon, and Benet began to serve as his right-hand man with the Acolytes. While his powers were always his own, there's a few important factors to consider with Exodus which landed him on our list. First, he's an Omega-level mutant who possesses incredibly high power levels, thought to be the result of tampering by Apocalypse. Second, he is a psionic vampire of sorts. When he is weakened or his energy is low, he can steal and absorb psionic energies of those around him. This is prominent when he's surrounded by loyal acolytes. Moving on to number 3, the Horsemen of Apocalypse. The Horsemen of Apocalypse are a group of individuals, typically mutants, who have been genetically altered and mentally conditioned by villain Apocalypse to be one of his elite minions, his generals, if you will. Either forced to or willingly, Apocalypse enhances their current abilities or endows them with new ones, and there's only ever 4 of them at any given time based on the biblical reference of the 4 horsemen: death, famine, pestilence, and war. While their powers do vary based on the individual, there have been a whole lot of mutants who have become superbly powerful due to this process. For example, the Horsemen of Death. That's a title that Angel, Wolverine, Gambit, Psylocke, Sentry, and many more have been bestowed with. Apocalypse has turned humans into mutants too, like Abraham Quiros, a young Vietnam War veteran who was paralyzed in combat, who felt betrayed and forgone by his country. So Apocalypse gave him the ability to walk again, and the ability to create explosions through kinetic contact, and also made him a horseman, so, you know. Evil, but he can walk. Up next at 2, Cassandra Nova. Another clone at this number. Cassandra Nova is a product of Charles Xavier's DNA. Before Xavier was born, a mystical parasitic being called a Mumendrai copied his DNA. Technically, she was born bodiless on an astral plane, so she copied Xavier's DNA in order to make herself a body. She grew with Charles in the womb and even tried to strangle him with his own umbilical cord. That's kind of metal. Fetus Charles defended himself with a psychic blast, causing his mother to have a miscarriage, which resulted in Cassandra's body being a stillborn. Yet she survived as cellular matter for decades until she was able to rebuild a physical form again. So while she doesn't owe many of her powers to Xavier, she did gain psionic powers from him, and his DNA helped her manifest into a physical form. Last but not least, in at number 1, Mister Sinister. Mister Sinister is by far one of the most powerful foes of the X-Men. While he may not have the strength of someone like Juggernaut or the scope of someone like Magneto, the implications of his nefarious actions are just as impactful at times. Sinister is Nathaniel Essex, a character who was first mentioned in Uncanny X-Men in 1986 as the employer behind the Marauders, but first appeared fully in the Uncanny X-Men issue 221 in 1987. Created by Chris Claremont as a means to explore a new foe for the X-Men after he grew tired of always going back to Magneto and the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, Essex is a human mutate, but he was created by a mutant. An OG mutant, actually. Apocalypse. Now, Sinister was a scientist from the 19th century who was obsessed with evolution and made a pact with Apocalypse in order to become immortal. He's effectively become a mutant thanks to his own genetic manipulation, too. He's telepathic, able to manipulate the minds of others, and project energy through telekinesis. Using genetic material from another mutant called Courier, Essex was able to gain complete control of his body at a cellular level, too. So he can regenerate, shapeshift, and is immune to injuries. Alright, there we have it, friends. What other supervillains can you think of that have gotten their powers from mutants? Give us a shout in those comments below and let us know your thoughts and feels. If you dug this video, spread that love, hit that like button, and be sure to subscribe to Top 10 Nerd for more lists just like this. In the meantime, thanks for watching, friends. I'll catch you all in the next video.